Next, a portion of Book TV's monthly 3-hour live program, In Depth.
I live in Northwest Washington near Walter Reed Army Hospital. If I go for a run, I could run into Silver Spring from here. It's just about a mile or so. So the nearest subway stop is the Tacoma Metro Station on the Red Line. And not far from here is where they just recently had a huge accident where 9 people were killed. So that gives you a sense of where we are in Washington. This used to be an area of the city that was reserved for people who were on vacation. When Abe Lincoln was president, his summer place was now on the grounds of the Veterans Hospital, and that's about halfway between here and downtown Washington. It takes about 20 minutes to drive downtown. And so his summer cottage was there, but people who wanted to come even farther up to get away from the smog and the humidity all around Foggy Bottom and the Potomac in midsummer would come up here. This was considered the Highlands, Tacoma, a little closer to heaven is what it literally means. And I remember when my dad first came here, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and when my dad first came to visit this house, he said to me, "You didn't tell me you'd moved to the suburbs. I thought you lived in the city." I said, "Well, I do live in the city. This is Washington, D.C." But the idea that it was a single-family detached house, with a little backyard and a little postage stamp out front of a yard, to him suggested, well, it looks pretty suburban to me. But that's a guy who was living at the time on the 22nd floor of a big building in Brooklyn, New York. That's where I grew up. Because I'm a working journalist, there is no typical day of working on a book for me. Books have to fit into my other responsibilities, to Fox News, to National Public Radio, to columns that I'm doing, to speeches that I'm giving. So it has to fit into what is a very sort of scheduled, heavily scheduled life. And the difficulty is that I need structure and I need consistency, because I think there is nothing more intellectually rigorous than doing a book. So what it requires is that I get up a little earlier or that I stay up a little later. Sometimes it requires that I simply, if I'm traveling that day, make a commitment to myself with my laptop, in hand, that I am going to learn something that day that adds to the content of the book. So it could be that I am doing research. It could be that I am working on a paragraph that I think is key to the understanding of this subject or this larger chapter. Trying to refine it, but I'm make a commitment to myself that no matter what is going on in my day, that the book becomes the touchstone, that I come back to it and I will spend time with that book no matter what it requires of me in terms of losing sleep or taking time away from another task, whether it's radio, TV, or newspaper work. To write, typically I'm on a laptop, and it's saved to this desktop here. But a lot of it takes place because I'm moving around and because my wife also uses this space as her office for all of the business stuff that, family bills and the like. And she plays games on the computer and she's got photos and things like that. This is a place where I save the material, but it's also a place where if I'm truly am struggling with a concept and idea, this is where I come. This becomes my sanctuary. This becomes the place where I can feel most as if I'm at work on the book. If you look around this room, I don't know, but like it tends to get cluttered with books because books then become points of reference. So if I'm working on a book, the desk is even worse. I've tried to clean it up so you guys can see the computers and the keyboards and the screens, but my wife would just complain about how junky it is, like how can anybody work in that environment? But for me, what it suggests is I'm in my element. I've got my books. You know, I've got the things I love and need and the intellectual sparks that get me going in terms of my own writing. And, you know, that's just who I am. I mean, I guess that's the way I work. So, you know, for example, there are 3 computers here. One is buried under a stack of newspapers here. But there's a 3rd computer here hidden away. And then there's this one and the big one. And, you know, I can have 3 programs running. I could be writing on the big computer, for example, over here. And then here I could have something like, you know, when I was doing, let's say, the Marshall book, the Marshall biography, I would have a chronology of his life, every day of his life laid out. So from the day that he was born in July of 1908 to the day that he died, every day had a notation. And if I knew anything about that day, it was in chrono, as I called it, chronology. So here's a printed version of the chronology I was telling you about that I used on the Marshall book as a research technique, to list every day in his life and then to list any event that I knew about that took place on that day. But in fact, chronology starts even before Marshall is born. For example, here's a date, July 23rd, 1867. And the reason that I have this in chronology is to give people, and give me as the writer, a sense of what came before Marshall's life. And here you'll see on this date, July 23rd, 1867, an ordinance providing for the education of the children of colored parents in the city of Baltimore. And here is all part of what is written as the law of that period, and you can understand the kind of civil rights movement that's taking place in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War in a city like Baltimore, Maryland, as black parents insist on some kind of public education for their children. And of course, this is directly relevant to Thurgood Marshall's story because he is the maestro, if you will, of Brown v. Board of Education, which, you know, in 1954, so literally, you know, almost 100 years later, is the child, if you will, of this moment back on July 23rd, this ordinance providing for the education of the children of colored people in Baltimore. And it would help me in terms of trying to map out significant moments, significant transitions, and make sure that I was always in touch as I'm moving forward in the narrative telling. And then on another computer, I could have research material that would break out in larger sense. For example, you know, speeches, documents, Supreme Court rulings, you know, other works that had been done about him could be operating in that sphere, interviews that I did, so that the interviews, if I pop up something on Chrono and it says, you know, he was in New Orleans, Louisiana on this date, and I know that he was visiting with someone, and then I go to that person's widow, suddenly I can see the whole interview with the widow there, and I can say, oh, that's the point of reference. That's what I am looking for. And then I can make a decision as to whether or not I want to reference it. It's just background that, you know, you pick up in passing, or is it an actual quote that I want to pull from her and use in the narrative, that it helps the story along. And then, of course, the big computer I would use for the actual writing of the book. The key I would say to any young person who came to me and said, I'm ready to do my first book is, this is not to be entered into lightly. You've got to really believe in the project and believe in your ability to do the project. And so get ready for those moments of doubt, anxiety, the sleepless nights, the, gee, I don't need to, why am I sleeping when I should be working thoughts. They just exist with book writing, you know. Why can't I go, why am I so tired? Why shouldn't I try another hour? And then you realize you're not getting anything done, you're so tired. And then why can't I get up an hour earlier? Or why am I agreeing to go have dinner with this person when I could be working? Everything becomes competition for your jealous lover, and your jealous lover is the book.
In Depth airs live at noon Eastern on the first Sunday of each month on Book TV on C-SPAN 2. Log on to booktv.org for information about upcoming guests.